Hi, I'm John, your Fix-It addict. Today, we're on a special mission. I have orders from the very top, the Commander-in-Chief herself, to fix our home coffee maker. What's happening is it's popping the GFI in the kitchen circuit. It's not blown breakers, just popping the GFI. So, close inspection underneath on the counter, I find some residual water. So internally, we're getting just a little bit of leakage that comes across the line, goes over the ground, and trips the GFI. So we're gonna take it apart. I'll show you how. Here's what we're gonna need for this project. Some old expired credit cards, wire ties, a driver, a smaller one would be great because there's a lot of screws to take out. Multiple bits, Phillips, and particularly a T10 star bit. There's going to be security screws in this. Pliers, side cutters, Phillips, flashlight, and then some heavier pliers. Let's get started. Always, before you start a project, make sure it's unplugged. Let's start by turning it upside down. That's going to let us get at these bottom screws. Let's take those out. There's 7 screws all together. Once you get all 7 out, try up the bottom, and it exposes our grounds. Take all of these off right away so we could remove the base off to the side. Next, we're going to want to remove this base, this whole inner base assembly. So remove the screws, including the screws for the filler base and the LED light, the 2 pump screws. And once you get those removed, cut these loose. These are wire ties that just hold the electrical in place. Just be real careful you don't clip the wires. Then remove the rest of these screws. Once the screws are removed and the wires are free, forgot the pump screws. You gotta loosen the pump so you don't end up pinching this hose. This has to be lifted off. I want to pull the cord out of the little keeper circle here. Oh, you gotta make sure the drain hose from the boiler is also, be real careful not to pinch it or make a hole in it because it's a lot of the stuff's silicone. Once you get the base off, put the pump screws back. I'll show you why in a minute. You just put those loose. Sure everything's free. Next, put the unit on its back, and we're going to need to remove these 4 screws. Open it up. There's a shiny screw right there. Those will be the T15 star screws, and they're on the hinge. And then up inside, there's 2 silver screws that got to come out. Take those out, and we'll proceed. You'll need to bring this up to get a nice straight shot at these T15 stars. Let's switch a bit over and take these 2 out. use your needle nose pliers to get in there and grab these. Once you get those 4 screws out, this top assembly comes off. And then on to removing the cover. Next we're going to remove the top cover. This is probably the hardest part of the whole project. But inside of there, underneath the cover, there's hooks that go that way. They latch into a frame. There's squares inside. They just slide forward. There's 2 of them here and 2 of them there. But you got to raise the back end up so you could slide it back. So I use credit cards. Force it in between the back and up and under. That brings the lip up and away from the back housing. Then take a screwdriver, just go in under the cover, go it back there. See how those go forward? There's 4 of them. So once you get it over the lip with the cards, it slides back. Now we're inside. Next we want to remove this back shroud. There's only 2 screws holding it. One right there. And then there's a forward one right there. Remove those 2. Now we're going to bring this shroud off. It just kind of lifts up and out. It's harder to get around everything than it is to get it off. Get this little hose out. Remember, it still has the switch attached, so a little tricky, but it comes off. Now we need to find out where the water's leaking. Set the unit up on top of a countertop. Make sure it's unplugged. And search for calcification, where water might be dripping and you'll see calcium forming, calcium deposits. Don't see anything there. That looks a little suspicious. So make a note of where you've seen possible leakage. Obviously look for wet spots, but by the time you get it open, it'll be dried up. So unless your inspection reveals an obvious leak or broken hose or something, we need to move on to the next step, which is going to be running the unit while opened. Make sure it's unplugged. Come around and connect your ground cables together. Make sure everything is away, all the electrical parts. This is where it gets uncomfortable if you're not sure about working with electric. And if you aren't, then by all means don't do this, because this is all going to be live electric when we energize it. So make sure you have a good walk area. Nothing's going to be in your way where you might put your hand on it if you trip. And what we're going to do is run it with the cover off and watch for leaks. So first we're going to take the container and we're going to actually put it on its resting spot where the inlet water supply goes into the pump. The reservoir has a little floating magnet that tells the system, hey, I'm out of water. We're not going to be able to get it close enough to the pickup for it to do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a button magnet. We're going to put it right there with where that convenience screw is. So it tricks the proximity sensor into saying, okay, I'm full of water, go. Then we're going to take the reservoir and plug it into the inlet. And we're going to run it. To keep the reservoir stable and balanced, just take a spacer, a tool or something, and put it under there to give it some legs, so to keep it stable during the running process. And take some Tupperware, put it under the outlet. Make sure everything's clear, make sure it's all dry. You don't want any standing water when you start. It has to be nice and dry. And then we'll plug it on in. Turn it on and cycle it. Make sure that the outlet is firmly into the inlet boot of the pump. Be sure to put the overflow into the reservoir so it's not spilling out on the counter. It's activated with the top down. As soon as it says ready, the boiler's heated up and it's ready to go. Again, remember, it's all live, so won't be touching anything on the unit. So during every fill cycle, you will need to open and close the inlet where the cup goes. And you'll see it switches to a ready state. And then choose brew. While it's brewing, watch for leaks. I found that it takes probably 3 or 4 cycles for it to heat up and any persistent leaks to open up once the unit expands. Look for leaks around those solenoid valves. Those are often leakers. You can see that one behind the reservoir. Like I said, you're probably going to have to go through probably 4 or 5 cycles for the unit to heat up and everything to expand where leaks would start. Because right now it's not leaking anymore, but it's just the first cycle. These solenoid valves are the Achilles heel of these Cuisinart machines. They leak right where they're formed or pressed around the base of the valve assembly. And this crude crimping, this is how it was. This is how it came from the factory. So I wouldn't even attempt to try to fix it. I would just replace these. And that's what we're going to do. And there's several of these on the units, so I would probably go as far as changing all of them. They're only $4, $5 a piece, as long as it's open up, because you really wouldn't want to go through all this all over again. So these are held in place by a band and a screw, so loosen the screw. Make sure it's unplugged. Remove it. There's the part number. I'm sure we could find these. But look how poorly these are crimped. It looks like somebody took it in there on a vise or something, but that's how they come from the factory. It just, you could see it's on one side of it is somewhat okay, but it's terrible, just terrible quality. Back here it's not crimped at all, hardly. Doesn't make sense that they would build an expensive coffee pot and put in such a poor device or poor solenoid. There's also one on the opposite side of the unit. Here again, there's a screw that releases this band. and it's wet too. We couldn't see it very well behind the reservoir, but it's leaking too, so both of these solenoids need to be changed. And it's the same part number. So let's get 2 of those ordered and we'll continue. So I looked up the solenoid valves on Amazon and eBay, and I found a seller called RST Products that sells new ones, 2 for $16.54. So that's what we're going to be ordering. Try to purchase new ones versus used ones because they don't seem to age well. So new ones are always best. We're going to get these ordered. Well, we got our solenoid today for the coffee pot, and we're ready to start installing it. We found it leaking right up under the pinched lip right there. Not much we could do with it. It's not something you could fix. To take apart, it's not worth the time. I was able to get 2 of these solenoids on eBay for $17, brand new. So let's get started. Okay, we're going to need to unsolder these 2 wires. We can start by pulling up on this little insulator. It just slides up to expose the solder joints. I would unsolder these while it's still clipped in before you take it out. The polarity doesn't matter. It's 12 volts DC coil either way. For this, you're going to need some flux solder, 30-watt soldering gun, and a tip cleaner. You could always use some Brillo or something if you don't have a tip cleaner. Then remove 1 strap screw. 1 is enough. And cut these ends off. Be careful with the hose. Use the silicone hose. Very delicate. It takes heat, but it doesn't take rough handling too well. Before you remove the tubes, have the new coil lined up so you know where the tubes go, and then put it, as you take one out, put one in the new solenoid. So these are kind of a pull and twist, but if they don't want to loosen up, you could put some thin pliers under them and kind of pry them up, because there's a bit of a lip on or barb on the pipe in there. And put that on the new one right away. So okay, that goes to the bottom one. Once you have the hoses on, make sure they're past the barb on the pipe. Make sure you strap them up. So these metal strips are going to be kind of hard to solder. So we're going to put some flux on them. This is a low temperature flux. You could get it on Amazon. That'll prepare the metal to take the solder. Pre-solder the iron so as to transfer the heat to the metal. Heat up the metal, and you'll see it'll create a bridge across that hole. Pre-solder your wires. Heat up the metal, heat up the solder. Of course, it's not going to want to do what I want it to do right there. Now repeat that procedure and replace the second solenoid. So fill the reservoir and reinsert it into the pickup point. Make sure your little magnet's in place to fool it in system into thinking that it's full. Power it up, set your bowl, and wait for it to heat up. When it's ready, make sure your bowl's in place, make sure your cover's closed, and hit brew. Put it on 12 cups so you could get a good amount out of it. And while it's brewing, watch your connections that you just did. Check your solenoids for leaks. So run, I would say, at least 4 or 5 containers through it. Keep checking for leaks while it's running. And a good tip is to do the hot water cycle. It really doesn't matter as long as there's water going through it. And as soon as the cycle finishes, ready light comes on, you could hit hot water again without having to open the lid. But if you wait too long, it'll go and say lid, open lid. But when you're testing it, you want to keep running water through, so it starts filling. And if you wait just to the point it's going to fill, you hear the pump running. It's filling the boiler. You could see it press ready, hit brew again. That way we didn't have to open the lid. But if you wait another 15-30 seconds, it'll go into open lid. It's good when you're troubleshooting and wanting to run a lot of water through it fast. Okay, now it's time to put it back together. Start by turning it over. Put a towel down first so it's not sliding around when you're working on it. A screwdriver or something for a spacer here so it stays flat. Remember your light wire. Wrap it around. And create a nice pathway out of harm's way. That mounts right there. Put those screws in, these two, tighten the motor screws, put that screw in, and put this screw in only halfway. That'll go down the rest of the way when we put the side cover on. Make sure that there's no wires around the boiler. I think it's hot. This is a thermal wire, so we're okay, but make sure there's nothing touching it before you go any farther. So before you go any further, make sure you pull all these cables up and through. You've got all 3 grounds. You've got the power cable. And you loop the power cable through this S here. And it holds it in place. Have that all pulled out before you go any farther. And on the back side here. So before you put the bottom on, start the assembly by putting the back cover on. You gotta kind of stretch it just to kind of get it over the mechanisms in here. If yours doesn't want to stretch or it's a little more brittle, get your hair dryer and just soften it up at the points where it's going to break. Like along this door is where it would crack, right there, right up there. Just hit it with a hair dryer, soften it up if yours won't bend out all the way. And there's a series of latches here. Everything's got to line up and then go in and down. Just like that. Once you get the back cover in and slotted in place, there's a screw that goes here and a screw that goes there. Now that these side pieces are screwed in, put on the cover. This is a two-part piece with a heavy metal top and a plastic cover for the mechanism. You gotta be real careful with these screws in here, with the spring and with how this latches in here, so you don't break these down the road. There's two tabs here that latch in right there. You gotta put these two pieces together first. And then tab push the tabs into the latch. And now we'll flip it. Then lay the coffee pot on its side and put in these screws here. This is where you need the T10 screw. It's a machine screw because it's going into steel. And there's one on the other side too. Then put your two screws up here. Make sure this plastic piece is latched, and check the action carefully to make sure it's all screwed together, or you'll break the tabs. Looking better. Okay, make sure everything inside is, nothing is touching the wires. Your strips are on. Make sure to put this overflow so there's a screw that goes straight down here, and then there's a screw that goes horizontally here. This one holds it down this way. This screw holds this back cover to the front. Once you get those two screws in, make sure you got your overflow back in place. Goes here somewhere. We move on. Once you've got the top or the back piece on, flip it over. We'll do the bottom piece. Make sure your wires are all pulled through the grounds. And your tank light, this pump is still loose. If it won't quite go, loosen the screws a little more. And this will drop right in. So once you get the cupboard in place, put the screws in, one there, two there for the suction line. Tighten down the motor screws. Take a tie strap, strap the electrical feed wires up into the frame. There's a little hook there that they go into. Make sure that your boiler feed line is up and over this holder. There's kind of a holder for the hose. Make sure your electrical cable is in the S in there. Put two screws in the back. Two screws there, one screw there, one there. We're going to start putting the metal base back on. Put the machine thread ground screw where the little ground symbol is back through. Put a nut and a washer. And then bring your ground cables through. See, it's going to go this way, so it's going to come around that way. Put the additional nuts here just so this ground doesn't ever come loose. If two do loosen up, you always got another one that isn't loose. Before you put the cover again, make sure these are out of harm's way. Take one last look at your screws. No metal is on the electrical leads to the boiler because this gets hot. You don't want any wire in that area. Well, your clamps are on. This is wire tied. And then put the base back on and then put the remaining screws in. And finally the top cover. Make sure this is closed. to get this lip up. Make sure that when you put this back together, you lock the connector clips back into the lip. You'll know right away because this will lift up and then you'll have to redo it. Redo it meaning taking these 4 screws out and lifting that up again. But they're locked in, they won't lift up. So to put the cover back on, double check everything in here, make sure there's no wires, nothing shorting. You've got your overflow hose in. And this kind of goes towards the back. It's got to be more back this way when you start, so you got a space up here. And you put it down and slide it in. It's got clips down, locked that way. There it is.